Hi, and welcome to a special press clips edition of Newsmakers. I'm Jerry Roberts. It is Friday, February 10, and I am very pleased to welcome my colleague, Bill Macfadyen, who is the publisher, co-founder, co-owner of Noozhawk, one of our remaining local news outlets in town. Bill, thanks so much for being with us. This morning, I think by my count, this is the fifth column you've now written about this awful story, the gunning down of a tourist, Rob Gutierrez, a man from Camarillo, husband, father of two daughters, volunteers at his church, soccer coach, way back in December before Christmas. And you've been writing about it in your must-read Best of Bill Friday column. Bill usually writes more about his approval of Dave Roberts' handling of the Dodgers pitching staff and
wait, have I written that? I don't know.
wherever he's eating lunch that week. But no, I mean, in all seriousness, you've been writing about this with a great deal of passion, and I think you really raise some interesting and important issues about the media and our relation to the government. So let's start at the beginning for those who haven't followed the story. Just walk us through what's happened. This starts on December 9th when what happens?
It starts the night of December 9th when there was some kind of an incident on Stearns Wharf. We still don't know what, but evidently suspects jumped out of a car, fired a shot, whether intentional or not. They hit a tourist, and all we know from that night was that the victim was an adult male. He was taken by ambulance, Santa Barbara Cottage Hospital, and police were searching for suspects. That was it. We tried to follow up the next day, or actually that night, Tom Bolton did, tried to follow up the next day. Didn't get anything. A couple of weeks later, December 20th, or 21st, I think, we had heard that the victim had died of his wounds. So we renewed our efforts to get more information, didn't get anything out of the police department. Tried to contact the police chief to find out the reason why. Didn't get anything. And then on January 19th, of course, they announced that they had made multi-agency arrests of 4 suspects, all 4 charged with or booked on murder charges, and allegedly with some gang connections. We tried to get more information because that was pretty vague. They announced in that statement that the victim had died back on December 20th. They identified him for the first time. But it was just a really curious way to have this crime or announce this crime in the very heart of our tourist district, Stearns Wharf, the most iconic place in Santa Barbara, arguably one of 3. And it was just like, this is what happened, very clinical. Don't have any more information. It's an ongoing investigation, blah, blah, blah. That was it. 373 words, and then no follow-up questions, no news conference. The city was completely silent about it. So, like I said, it was just a very curious set of circumstances, unlike anything I can recall.
Yeah, that's it. And as you wrote this morning, I've lived in Santa Barbara most of my life, and this is the damnedest, most infuriating non-reaction I've ever seen. So there's a lot of pieces to it. Let's try to break it down a little bit. On your first piece on January 20th, the day after the arrest and stuff, you wrote, police refused to provide further information about the incident at one of the most high-profile locales in Santa Barbara, in spite of repeated requests by Noozhawk over subsequent days and weeks. So you guys were working or trying to work the story from the night of the incident itself. And what was the police department telling you, and who in the police department was telling you?
Well, I mean, they put it all on the public information officer, which
Ethan Ragsdale.
Yes, and he did a great job as far as we're concerned. But you know, he's just following orders, and he was able to just say basically that it's an open investigation. We can't reveal any details. Trust us. And so when that wasn't sufficient for us, Tom Bolton, you know, reached out to the chief through email and phone calls and didn't get anything.
Yeah.
Until January 20th.
Yeah. So you guys had a source, a confirmed source that Mr. Gutierrez had died, and they wouldn't confirm that either.
Correct.
Okay. All right. And then you mentioned the chief, Kellyanne Gordon, who's still, I think we can still describe as our new police chief. And then you noted that Section 6254F of the California government code says this information is considered public. And what did they say when you all raised that?
That's part of the damnedest reaction. There was no response. So, you know, what could we do? I mean, we could sue if we wanted to, I suppose, but what does that really get us? We thought that, or I thought that as publisher, we could mount some public pressure to get them to comply. And I want to be clear, we're not trying to trample on the police investigation, get in the way, in any way, sideline that investigation. We think this is a serious crime, but the law is the law, and the police department has to follow that law just as much as we do. And so, you know, some of this is public information, and it's for the good of the public. The public deserves to know what happened, and the police need to be telling us more than what they told us. So, like, just trust us. We're investigating this. We'll get to the bottom of it, and then we'll reveal all at some certain date later on. That's not acceptable.
Yeah. And then in that January 20th piece, you also, and I think this is what you were just referencing, you wrote that Bolton, Gianna, and I were in the process of elevating our request for transparency at SBPD when suddenly police pounced on January. Is that you were thinking of taking some legal action against them at that point?
I won't say, but you know, there are other ways that we could raise the profile of our ask more publicly.
Okay. All right. Okay. So then on January 19th, they do arrest these 4 adults and one 16-year-old male who's not identified at what, 4 different locations all over the place. And you wrote, the break in the case is good news, and I pray that Gutierrez family and friends get the justice and closure. And then here I think we're getting to the nut of the argument. You say, of course, some readers may think Noozhawk is just miffed that police weren't providing us with any information in an open investigation. It's a fair point, but it's beside a point. Frankly, the public should be just as alarmed as we are over. So what you were hearing from the police department, or tell me if this was what we were hearing, was, oh, you know, if we had told you anything, including the fact that he had died 6 weeks ago, you know, these guys might have hidden. Or they would have hidden better than they were hiding, or what? I mean, what was your understanding of what their explanation was for why they couldn't release more information?
That is exactly what we were told, that any hint of an investigation, that apparently these guys had no clue that they were being investigated or tracked down, that they had gotten away with it. Any hint would have sent them underground and in the wind, as they say. And I just find that really hard to believe. Police are able to solve crimes every single day when the criminals know that they're looking for them. And I don't view this as anything really different, but Tom Bolton would be a great guest on your show.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
he and Gianna should be on here more often.
Well, we get, you know, Josh Molina talks so much that it's
oh, Josh would defer. Josh is great.
Josh would defer. Boy, those three words I've never heard in the same sentence.
Well, not every time, but he would defer sometimes.
All right. Okay. So then a week later, in your Best of Bill column, and you always list the top 5 best read stories on the site. Again, it's still, even though it's 8 days later, it's still the best read story. And you talk about now we've heard from the police apparently that there are West Side gang connections about the suspect. So what was your concern there? That the police should have talked more about that, or given some indication about how important, are we in a new era of, gang wars, or what's going on?
Sure. A couple points. So the police didn't actually say the word West Side. That was from the criminal complaint filed by the district attorney's office. The police said nothing about that, the affiliation, but we don't know. Noozhawk doesn't think there's any significant increase in gang activity in Santa Barbara, but we don't know. And here's a tourist allegedly murdered in some kind of gang activity. And again, the city's not saying anything about that. And this is not, I think one of our readers in a letter to the editor said, it wasn't a West Side shooting or an East Side shooting. This was on State Street, basically at the end of State Street, the exact center. And so that's alarming to a lot of residents. It's alarming to a lot of business owners. I've heard from merchants on Stearns Wharf, people in the funk zone. And, we don't know. Is this something we need to start paying attention to? Is this no longer safe to go down to Camarillo Boulevard? We just don't know. And we're not getting any answers from the police or city officials.
Yeah. And yeah, thanks for correcting me on that DA thing. And when in the DA complaint, it says they're connected to a local criminal street game. I think is the exact language of it. And it is kind of hard. And I think the other point that you've been on about is, where's City Hall in all this? And talk a little bit about that and what conversations, if any, you've had with city officials and what your concern is there.
Sure. I've had no public conversations with anybody. I've talked to several off the record, but elected officials are more than happy to go on camera and talk about anything under the sun. But this is a situation where it seems, at the heart of Santa Barbara's identity, and they clammed up and don't have anything to say. The city administrator, Rebecca Bjork, who actually is in charge of the city and supervises the police chief, she's had nothing to say. But again, this was a tourist who was murdered in the heart of our tourist area, and nobody has anything to say about that. Nobody has talked about this is a tragic incident for the family of the victim. Our hearts go out to them. We support them. This is not who our city is. Nobody's had any kind of statement about the public safety and whether the public needs to be, more careful about going about their everyday business, going to tourist areas, going to State Street. Nobody said anything. It's inexplicable.
Yeah, well, but you do raise one possibility in the I think I'm looking at the 29th now, because you had a special column on Sunday, usually right on Friday, and then you
had more to say.
Had more to say. And you talked about having been in touch with the victim's friends and colleagues in Camarillo and said their questions are why the dearth of information, why didn't the news media cover the story until January 19th? And was this a cover-up by civic and business leaders to protect Santa Barbara's $2 billion a year tourism industry? You must have gotten some interesting feedback on that one.
I did, and I think, and that was the same column that I wrote, that if everybody knew how little influence the business community had, Santa Barbara would be it explains a lot. But I did hear from a lot of or several of Gutierrez's friends and colleagues where he worked, and they just didn't understand that. And I don't think that was there was certainly no conspiracy to cover this up. I don't believe that for a second, but it just is really a curious non-response that raises those questions. And what I don't think city officials understand is, in this day and age of reviews and Yelp and the internet and all this kind of stuff, I mean, this can spread like wildfire. And Santa Barbara is dependent on tourism dollars. And if this gets out that tourists are not safe coming to Santa Barbara because they could be popped by some gangbanger, what does that do to our industry? What does that do to our image as a community? And so I think there should be some concern about that we need to refute that. We need to get in front of this story and explain this was not indicative of what you can expect when you come spend your dollars here in Santa Barbara. But to outsiders, to people who are obviously hurting from their grief, I can't say that they're wrong in that assumption. That it certainly seems like a cover-up.
Yeah.
It's definitely not on the business community's part or the tourism community, but where's City Hall to refute that?
Yeah. Now, was Noozhawk in touch with Mr. Gutierrez's family directly? Do we know what they thought about the way the police handled this, about not putting out the death, or I guess they didn't say anything publicly at the time either.
I have not spoken with them.
Okay. All right. Okay. And then, yeah. Okay. So then I guess, I think you expressed pretty clearly what the conflict is with the police department. As professional journalists, we at Noozhawk understand why law enforcement officials cannot and should not divulge certain details of an ongoing criminal investigation, especially a homicide. We respect the circumstances and pressures that police operate under. But as I wrote previously, there is also state law that applies to law enforcement, and we, the news media, have a right under the California Criminal Code to report some of that information to you, and you have a right to know that. I mean, that's always there's always a tension between those two things.
Sure.
But in this case, I think you point in the next sentence to the new chief. Do you think this is something that is specific to her? In other words, has she brought a quieter brand of communication from the police department, or is this more institutional, and has this been going on previously?
Well, it didn't start with her. This has been a trend that's happened over the last several years. We don't have enough time to get into the whole, theories and philosophies on that, but it didn't start with her. I don't know her. I've met her a couple of times. We serve on a board together. I've tried to reach out to her. Interestingly enough, we only finally connected this week. That's another whole story. But I don't really know what her philosophy is and how she goes about her job. She's been rather invisible in the community, to be quite honest. So, I think that's, as you know, Santa Barbara is all built on relationships, and to have a police chief who's kind of just in the shadows is different for us. I'm not sure that it's a good thing, but the visibility there is questionable. But I think the larger issue as a journalist is, it's not up to government or the police department, excuse me, to state what is and is not newsworthy. That's our job. That's our obligation. And it's up to the public to decide that. But, they certainly can ask us for some circumspection and whatnot, but it's not that's not part of their responsibility to tell us what we can and cannot report. And I think, especially in a high profile case like this, in a very public setting, the responsibility is even greater on their part to be transparent and to disclose as much as they can as quickly as possible, so that the public can make their own assessments on the danger and how they want to proceed.
Yeah. Yeah, I've had an interview request in, and I'm pretty optimistic we're going to be able to speak with her next week. So have the chance to raise some of these questions. You know, we talked about this a little bit on the show last week. You know, and I am totally with you on the media's right to have information, and I'm kind of a purist on that. And you know, I do think there is a problem that goes well beyond the police department, and certainly throughout Santa Barbara, at City Hall, at the Board of Supervisors, at every executive or administrative agency you can think of, and I think throughout California as well. You know, where it's just damn hard to get, you know, information that we ought to have. That's the public's information. So what do you do? Well, then you have to file a Public Records Act request, and oh, you know, you're supposed to get it in 10 days, which is a joke because you never get it in 10 days. And then, oh, well, you forgot to, you know, put a comma in the third sentence there, so we didn't give you all of that. It's just enormously frustrating. And I don't know, I mean, I'm old, and so I tend to forget things, but it doesn't seem to me that in the old days it used to be this hard to get information. What's your view on that?
Yeah, well, I think, you know, I'm right there with you in the age part, but I think it's different now. When we were starting out our careers, I think you know, our publications had some heft and some there was fear at City Hall that you didn't want that publication breathing down your neck, so you know, you complied, and you worked with them to try to get this information out. Those days are gone. And, you know, Noozhawk is not powerful enough by itself to do this. You know, we can enlist public opinion to perhaps help move the needle a little bit. But I think at the end of the day, government agencies just don't fear the media anymore. And, you know, part of that is our fault because, you know, in general, the news media has taken some positions and done some stuff that has really damaged our own brand. And I think that's, you know, the journalism industry needs to own up to that fact and make some internal reforms so that we can get claw back some of that respect. But you know, I don't know how to fix the problem. I don't know how you we're not going to go back to those days when it was the daily newspaper that was calling the shots and getting results just because they wrote an editorial about it. But we can't continue on this path. It's dangerous for society. It's dangerous for democracy.
Well, you and I have talked about this, you know, a lot, just sort of the macro changes in the media industry over the last, quarter century now or something like that. I mean, you know, you did used to have a general interest publication, at least one in every town that, quote unquote, everybody read, but at least that there was a shared set of information and facts. And now, you know, for various reasons, some very local and some not so local, you know, it's just so atomized. I mean, you know, I was saying, you know, I think we used to have 60, 65 people working in the newsroom at the daily paper. Now, you know, if we counted up all of the reporters who were doing hard news in Santa Barbara for Noozhawk, for the Independent, I mean,
it's a fraction.
It's just a fraction of that. So that's part of it. But then the other part is just that it's atomized, you know, that there is not a general information. I mean, a general interest audience. It's all kind of fractionalized. What kind of response have you gotten on this, both to the story itself and to your column from your readers?
I've gotten a huge response. Most of it has been, you know, good job. We really appreciate this. But what I find most interesting is the source of where those responses are coming from. I've heard from people on the west side. I've heard from people on the east side. White, Hispanic, Black, the people from Camarillo, law enforcement. It's interesting. Very few people have, there's obviously a contingent of people who rightfully so say that, we need to let the police do their job. I don't disagree with that, but they can do both. They can provide information and do their job. And that's what my whole emphasis has been about with regards to the police department. But for the most part, people are angry about this. They're offended that this happened in their town and that this is going on. And they're not happy with the lack of response by the city. I think in times of crisis, we look to those elected officials, rightly or wrongly, to help provide some context and some ownership of what's happening. And we're just not getting that from anywhere in the city government.
Yeah, one of the you mentioned you talked to a couple of city hall folks and quoted one of them anonymously as calling this a tragic one-off. Is that what's going on? That the city officials don't want to come out and have a press conference and say, extend their condolences and everything because they don't want to raise their profile of this.
I don't know. I can't answer that question. I've not had that answer. But they're deferential to the police. And, I certainly understand that on a certain level, but they have a larger obligation. And, if you're an elected official in this town or the city administrator, you are on the same peer level as the police chief. And that doesn't preclude you from going out there and talking to the public directly. Doesn't have to be about the investigation. Don't even have to mention the investigation. But this was an incident that happened on your watch in your town, in not some dark alleyway, but right there in the center of your universe, and you don't have anything to say about it. That's unconscionable. They should be ashamed of themselves.
All right, let me real quick, just two specific things. You in one of your columns, you talked about Dan McCaslin, one of your readers and a community-minded fella, who talked about maybe having a neighborhood stations on the west side, on the east side. Talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, Dan, I had forgotten that we used to have, I know we used to have a west side substation, and I'm pretty sure we had one near the Franklin Center on the east side. I don't know. I don't remember when they went away. I'm guessing it was when the city had was in the throes of its near bankruptcy, like 20 years ago, and they probably just pulled the funding. I get that, but anyway, do those help prevent crime? Maybe not, but it's a police presence, a constant police presence in those neighborhoods. And I can tell you that at Camino Real Marketplace, which of course is private property, but I know that customers and employees out there appreciate the fact that the sheriff's department has a substation in the heart of that shopping center. And there's cop cars and there's sheriff's deputies walking back and forth, and they're there maintaining a presence. And Dan, who's lived on the west side for most of his life, had mentioned that the residents appreciated having that presence there. So it got me thinking that, we're going to build this Taj Mahal Police Department building down next to Antioch, which is overdue and needed. I've been in that the current police station, and it's just substandard in almost every way. So they definitely need a bigger and more modern facility. But why does everybody have to be there? Why can't we have some officers stationed out in those two communities, those two neighborhoods? And the response on that has been really, really strong from the public, from Noozhawk readers.
I'm going to take a wild guess that Council Member Oscar Gutierrez was not crazy about that idea, but
he hasn't said anything. So
who knows? So go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I'm just saying, but if they're not going to propose some of this stuff, then, I'll do it.
Well, and you worked up the budget, Bill. That was
That was a back of the napkin kind of thing.
Useful for them to. Well, that's kind of no, I don't want to go there.
With help from a retired sheriff's department officer.
This raises sort of another broad question too. Is it that Santa Barbara can't do stuff anymore? I mean, look, you
look at downtown State Street. Here we are. I've been joking that 100 years from now, we'll still be talking about what to do about State Street. And at first it was funny. Now it's no longer funny.
I'm pretty sure you're right. But there does, even I've only lived here 21 years or something, but there does seem to be kind of I don't know whether it's a decline in the spirit of what's going on or what it is, but less participation, less interest in the city as a whole. I'm not sure, and I wonder if this is not part of that.
Could be. I don't know either. I haven't really thought about that too much. It'd be a good subject for the community to have a conversation about.
Yeah. And speaking of that, you hint at the top of today's column. You got more stories coming on this next week. What can we look for?
Well, we've been doing our own digging on the case, and we're pretty close to having that buttoned up. So I would say by midweek next week, we'll have a pretty comprehensive account of what we know happened, what we've been able to confirm happened. So we're pretty confident in that. We just have a few details to nail down.
Okay. All right. And last question, Bill. So, we are where we are now, and whatever's happened or hasn't happened has happened. What do you think should happen now in terms of the police department, in terms of City Hall, in terms of the business community? What should be done to address this at this point?
That's a really good question. I think the community needs to have a conversation about this whole situation. And, was it acceptable? Are we okay with this? And what do we want to happen about this? I don't think it should be led by the police department. I don't think it should be led by the city council. I think the community needs to have that conversation. So, whether it's the business community as the catalyst for that, or the Chamber of Commerce, or Noozhawk, or a foundation. But I think the way this particular incident went down, and then I've been on the case of the 2021 drive-by murders of those two Santa Barbara High School students, and the curious non-response to that. I think the Santa Barbara High principal spoke one time at the city council, but there was no public reaction to that. And here are two students who were in class one day, and the next day their desks are vacant because they were shot and killed. Nobody seemed to care except for their families and their neighbors. So I think it's a culmination of several things that have gotten us to this point. And this one just had, all the circumstances just converged at this one location, and literally and figuratively. And I think that's something that the community needs to confront and decide, like, where are we on this? What is this acceptable to us? Is this what we want to continue? Because I think it's going to, if we allow this to continue, something's, where does it stop? It only gets worse. And I would like to see more leadership from people in power, but I'm not seeing that. So I don't know. I have heard from a lot of business owners, but I'm not sure that they're the right leaders for this. And it's a controversial topic, so a lot of them are not going to want to stick their heads out. They're more than happy for me to do it for them, but I'm not sure that I should be doing it either. But I will if need be.
I wonder if this is a case for our newly rebooted Fire and Police Commission with all
Well,
the
you would think
new powers.
it should be.
Uh,
Where are they in this too?
That's yeah, it just occurred to me. I don't know. All right. Well, listen, Bill Macfadyen, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks, Jerry.
The publisher and co-founder of Noozhawk, which does the work of 10 times as many people as,
Well,
as
well-
we used to have in terms of local news.
That's Tom Bolton and Gianna Magnoli who do that work, and Josh. I don't do that much.
Well, you're out there selling the ads all the time. I know what you're doing. I've had your job. Hey, Bill, thanks a lot. And I just have to say, go Padres this year. I can't even say go Giants because of where we are with our off-season signings. You know, two more guys with long medical histories who are 35 years old playing in the outfield. That's going to be great.
Well, I think you dodged a bullet with Carlos Carrera. So
yeah, apparently, gee whiz. All right, well, pitchers and catches report in about 2 weeks. So
thank goodness.
we'll look forward to that. Bill, thanks so much for taking the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Jerry. I appreciate the opportunity.